Hello everybody and welcome to another Indie Game First Look, this time for Loop Hero, published by Devolver Digital and developed by 4 Quarters. Now Devolver Digital has really been knocking it out of the park with their published games. It's been really great if you love indie kind of old throwback style games, and it's kind of a testament to that because usually I only play games for an hour or two for these videos, but this time I almost completely completed the game 100% before being like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be recording something to talk about this. I was just enjoying myself too much, so now we're going to be going back with the hindsight of having somebody who's played this game a ton and going back and kind of explaining things. So this game is a roguelike game where you are the one who builds the game that your character plays through. And the story reason for this is really amazing. The story really caught my interest right off the bat. So basically the story is that this skeleton wizard comes down from the sky one day and just completely wipes everything out. Not only just destroys everything, but also completely destroys the memory of anything even having existed in the first place. Fortunately for our hero, he's not very good at his job apparently, and our hero is for some reason immune to this fact. And he wakes up in a mostly black void, but then finds a path that he travels on, and this is your loop. This is why you're the loop hero. You travel this loop over and over and over again, and that's all that exists of the world. And your character, as he explores and progresses, starts to remember things about the world that was lost. And as he remembers things, those things come into existence. So you are very really shaping and designing the world from the gameplay perspective and also the story perspective. And everything, basically, your character remembers them as he encounters them, which makes a weird kind of catch-22 situation of the chicken and the egg, basically. So your character walks this loop, and as he walks, he fights monsters that will drop equipment and drop tiles down that you can place on the map. You can basically think of this map as like a game board, basically, that you're placing tiles down onto, and all the tiles have various effects. Some of them will be buffs to yourself. Some of them will be tiles that grant you resources and spawn different types of monsters that will also grant you different types of equipment and resources and all of that kind of thing. You're the one who's determining what your experience in the world is going to be like. And as you loop and loop and loop, the monsters get stronger and stronger. They drop better gear, and eventually you'll probably get to the point where the monsters are just getting a little too tough. You can't quite beat them anymore, so you need to stop before you lose all of the stuff that you've gathered. And that's what your camp is for. Every time you loop around to reach your camp, you can stop and take a rest. And at that point, you bank all of these resources that you've been acquiring. And the resources are used to upgrade your camp itself. The camp starts off very basic with nothing there at all, but for some reason, the people who are there kind of fade in and out of existence. They forget and remember each other, or forget and remember their own skill sets over time. But for some reason, you are the anchoring factor. Everything that you touch and bring back to the camp, for some reason, stays solid, stays real. So they can start to build more buildings there at the camp, and these buildings will upgrade you, give you new abilities, give you new tile sets that you can place down the map, and basically, just get you more and more powerful so that you can do more and more loops. Now, to spice things up a little bit, there are interactions that will happen between various types of tiles that will do special effects, and these interactions will also get you a special resource type, which you definitely need in order to acquire some of the higher end upgrades and building types. So I'll give you a couple just that you should be finding out fairly early on, but it's good to know that you can do this beforehand. There's a metal tile that affects how much you heal every day. I forgot to mention that actually, as you walk around the loop, days will progress. I'm not sure how there are days without a sun and moon cycle and without like an actual planet, but however, there are days and they affect how things happen. So as I said, the meadows heal you, affect how much you heal every day. And if you place a meadow next to any other kind of tile, the meadow will turn into a flowering meadow, and it heals you for more every day, and gets you that special resource type that I mentioned. So you definitely want to do that as much as possible. Also, if you place rocks and or mountains in a 3x3 square, you'll actually make a giant mountain summit that will get you a ton of the extra resource and a ton of extra hit points. Now, as another little hint at something else you can do with some tile sets, when you first meet a vampire, the game tells you that the vampires were actually basically, if I may use the term, a benevolent dictator of human civilization. They would place their castles next to human settlements and basically rule over them in a kind and peaceful way, in exchange for blood, of course. However, with the extreme lack of humans being around anymore, the vampires have gone completely blood crazy and insane. So they will attack everyone on sight instead of being benevolent. So, maybe there's something you can do with that particular interaction. I'll just leave that hint there. Now, of course, like any roguelike, there is a risk and reward system. Like I mentioned, you can make a 3x3 tile to make a mountain that gives you a ton of hit points. However, that mountain will also start to spawn harpies, which are an extra type of enemy. Also, if you place too many mountains down, or mountain tiles down, you'll start to spawn a goblin camp, which is by far my most hated tile type of all of them, because goblins are insanely overpowered. They spawn in large. They spawn very quickly and in large groups, and they buff each other when one of them dies. So you kill one, and then the rest of them get buffed up, and they start attacking really fast and a lot of damage, and they're just impossible to deal with at certain points. So that's why I have the Oblivion card. The Oblivion card will remove any established tile from the map or delete a group of monsters off of the road. So I usually will save some Oblivion cards to get rid of goblin camps, because they're just such a pain in the ass. And no matter what, no matter how good you're doing in the game, the goblins are always a problem. And they are more of a problem partially because of how the combat kind of works in the game. This is one of my only real complaints about the game, I suppose, is the way the combat plays out. All of the combat's automated. You don't control any of it at all, outside of choosing what equipment you have and what stats you choose to buff. Combat is completely automated. You can't even tell the character which monster you want to prioritize in the attack order. So he attacks one at random, as far as I can tell, and that can cause some severe problems, because you'll have, for instance, for the vampires, you'll have the vampire there who you really want to kill first, because he's typically the most powerful guy on the board at any point. But your character will be prioritizing like slimes instead of the vampire, and it's really a pain in the ass, because he'll just stay there and beat the shit out of you while you're killing these like little nothing slimes. And that also applies the other direction. For instance, you'll unlock other classes as you progress through the game, and one of my class favorites for any game is the Necromancer, just because I like having the minion combat. You summon guys who fight for you, basically. And the issue with that is sometimes monster prioritization will not work properly. They're supposed to prioritize your skeletons over you and kill your skeletons instead of you. But sometimes that prioritization breaks, and they'll just waylay on you the entire time and ignore your skeletons completely. And sometimes that can cause you to die when you probably shouldn't have died. And that's really frustrating on occasion. So as I mentioned, you have different classes, and every class has their own set of equipment that they make use of and their own stats that they care about. For instance, the warrior, he has damage and defense and counterattack and evasion, that kind of stuff. You have a rogue class that cares about getting critical strikes and upping his critical damage, upping how much evasion he has so he doesn't take hits, because he is obviously fairly frail, not having as much armor as the warrior class does. And then you have the necromancer, and his stuff is all about buffing how strong his skeletons are, how many skeletons he has. He gets a damage shield at the start of every fight, and you want to buff how much that damage you have on your damage shield so that you don't die in the unfortunate case that they attack you instead of your skeletons. Now the question at this point might be like, okay, you're looping over this stuff. Well, like, what's the end goal here? What are you trying to accomplish? Well, besides just upgrading yourselves and upgrading yourself and getting more and more tile sets and kind of experimenting with the tiles and how powerful you can get and how many loops you can go before dying, doing that kind of experimentation. There's also a meter on every loop that you have. That's the boss meter. And that meter goes up as you place more and more tile sets. And the boss, whenever he shows up, he'll show up when you place too many tiles and fill up the boss meter, and he replaces your camp. So you basically want to wait until you're strong enough to where you think you can fight the boss, because once you get into the fight with him, that's it. You either win or you lose, and lose a ton of resources if you die to him. So you have to be really prepared. And as I said earlier, the more loops around the map you do, the stronger all the enemies get, and that applies to the boss as well. So this, once again, it reaches into the risk-reward system of trying to go into the boss before he gets too strong, but not wanting to go into the boss before you're strong enough to fight him. You have to kind of find a good balance there of how strong should the boss be with this many loops versus how strong you're currently at with that many loops. So it creates an interesting back and forth. And that's another big thing with the risk reward, of course, is how many monsters do you want to fight per loop? Because the more monsters you fight, the more equipment you get, and after you unlock a certain building, you'll start to gain levels from fighting monsters as well. So it's how many monsters can I survive fighting per loop to maximize my number of equipment drops and maximize my number of levels that I get, and to maximize the number of tiles I'm getting, so that I can increase the boss meter at the pace that I want to increase it. And it's all about finding this balance, and a little bit of RNG, of course. There's always going to be RNG in these types of games. That's just how these systems work in general. But it's kind of manipulating RNG and manipulating, how many encounters are you fighting per loop, that kind of thing. And also, what tiles are you bringing into the thing. So every tile gives you different types of resources, as I mentioned earlier. So when you get towards the end game, and you're really striving to do certain types of upgrades or build certain types of buildings, it becomes a matter of what tile sets do I need to bring into the match to make sure that I am acquiring these resources at the fastest clip possible, and I'm not acquiring resources that I don't really care about. For instance, if you're doing really well on the wood resource and you don't need any more, then you probably shouldn't bring in tile sets that are for getting wood. It's a waste of your time. You should bring in tiles that are getting you other types of resources. And certain tile sets are really, really good at getting you some of the higher end resources that are needed for the really top tier buildings and upgrades. Certain tile sets are the only way to get some of these resources. And the game is kind enough to tell you how to get this resource, of course, after you've already found one of them by yourself. But of course, going on, if you want to, I guess, cheat, quote unquote cheat, or just not have to try and find the stuff yourself, there are of course wikis that you can go and look up how to acquire certain types of resources. I had a good time just investigating and putting different tile sets together and trying to see, how these different tiles work together, and seeing what kind of interactions I could find on my own, just to have a little bit of experimentation, have some fun with it. But yeah, like I said, I think I covered everything, most everything. I didn't tell all of the tile set interactions. I want to leave that to you guys to find for yourselves. Some of them are fairly interesting. Some of them are really cool to see them work out. I'll leave you with this, I guess. This game, I'll get back to the story that I mentioned at the earlier part. This game has a fairly interesting story about it. The way that your mind affects the world, and how you rebuild the world. And your character has a couple of, I guess, existential moments where he kind of is trying to reflect on the nature of reality and the nature of the world and things of that nature, and whether he's really necessarily a good guy in the whole situation. Because a lot of the monsters are sentient creatures that you're fighting, and they are, they're basically just fighting for survival like you are. So as you mass murder them, are you necessarily the good guy? And it creates an interesting conundrum of, everyone's just trying to survive in this world of where there's very little to go around, and you're not the people that you're fighting are not necessarily the bad guys to be fair. So anyway, yeah, I definitely do recommend this game to anyone who likes roguelike type of games. And it's only $15. It's only on PC as well, basically on any of the different storefronts on PC. So it's fairly cheap, and you'll get a good amount of enjoyment out of it. I've personally apparently put 24 hours into it. I didn't realize I had done that, and I got it through GOG because GOG gives the most of a percent cut to the developers and the publisher, which I appreciate. So I do recommend, if you get the game, I would try and get it through GOG. They also don't have DRM and let you download the game and all that other benefits. So that's all I have to say about Loop Hero. I hope you all appreciate it. If you did, leave a like, leave a comment, your own thoughts about this game, and maybe about Devolver Digital in general. I have enjoyed every game I've played from them, so they're definitely on my list of like publishers to keep an eye on, just for the list of games that they've published. I hope you all will join me for next time. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.